What if everything you were taught about money was a lie? I'm not talking about small mistakes or outdated advice. I mean the entire system, the dollars you save, the teachers you trust, the assets you think are keeping you safe, built on foundations that are quietly sinking. Most people don't see it. Most people don't want to see it. And that's exactly why the poor and middle class keep falling behind. In his controversial book FAKE, the author throws a punch straight at the heart of the financial world. He argues that we're living in an age of fake money, backed by nothing printed at will, draining the value of your savings every single day. And while we're taught to work hard, get a good job, save money, the reality is that the money we're saving is losing purchasing power faster than we can earn it. But it doesn't stop there. He exposes fake teachers, the people trusted to prepare us for life, who themselves have never built wealth, never taken financial risks, and never lived outside the system they promote. Then come the fake assets, the retirement plans, mutual funds, and safe investments sold to millions of people who have no idea what's inside them or how vulnerable they really are. This book isn't just a warning, it's a wake-up call, a challenge to think differently, to question what we've always accepted, and to step out of the financial fog that keeps so many people trapped. So in today's breakdown, we're diving into the lies, the traps, and most importantly, the strategies that can help you rise above the noise and take real control of your financial future. Chapter 1 opens with a direct warning. The global financial system is changing faster than most people realize, and those who keep trusting old ideas about money are the ones most at risk. The author argues that the world is divided into two groups: people who understand how money actually works, and people who only understand what they were taught. The second group, he says, is getting poorer not because they're lazy, but because they're operating in a system built on fake money. He defines fake money as currency that is no longer backed by anything real. Ever since the U.S. left the gold standard in 1971, money has essentially become debt. It's printed at will, created digitally in massive quantities, and controlled by central banks and governments. This system rewards borrowers and asset owners, while punishing savers and employees. The author explains that traditional advice, work hard, save money, stay out of debt, made sense decades ago, but no longer works in a world where cash loses purchasing power every year. The chapter emphasizes that inflation is not an accident, it's a design feature of the system. When governments print more money, the supply increases but the value decreases. People feel this through rising prices, shrinking savings, and wages that never seem to keep up. Meanwhile, those who understand the game use debt strategically to purchase real assets that grow with inflation. This is the central divide. The financially educated play by the rules of the new system, while everyone else still plays by the rules of the old one. The author also highlights how financial crises, from recessions to market crashes, are symptoms of a deeper structural issue. The system depends on constant expansion of money and credit. Without endless printing, the economy would collapse. With endless printing, the currency eventually collapses. This creates a cycle where governments must keep creating fake money just to survive, pushing society closer to a reset. Chapter 1 positions gold and silver as real money because they hold value. Regardless of economic conditions, they cannot be printed, manipulated, or inflated. The author doesn't frame precious metals as investments, but as financial insurance, a way to protect purchasing power when fiat currencies weaken. He stresses that the goal isn't to scare the reader, but to prepare them. The world is entering a period of rapid transformation, and those who don't understand the nature of money will be the most vulnerable. The chapter closes with a call for financial intelligence. The author insists that the real threat isn't fake money itself, it's ignorance about fake money. People don't need to predict the future. They need to understand the system they're living in. Because once you see how money truly works, you stop playing defense and start building wealth on your own terms. Chapter 2 centers on a critical theme: trust. The author argues that modern money works only because people believe in it. The phrase "in God we trust," printed on U.S. currency, is not just a motto. It's a reminder that the entire financial system is built on psychological confidence. not intrinsic value. Once that trust weakens, everything built on it becomes unstable. The author introduces the idea that most people trust the wrong institutions and the wrong individuals when it comes to money. They trust governments to manage currency responsibly, schools to teach financial literacy, and banks to protect their savings. But according to the author, these entities benefit when citizens stay financially ignorant. Modern money, being fiat, requires mass trust to function, and institutions reinforce this trust even when the underlying system is deteriorating. He explains that after the U.S. abandoned the gold standard in 1971, money stopped being tied to something real. It now represents debt, promises backed not by assets, but by the government's ability to tax and borrow. As a result, people are placing trust in political decisions, not objective value. This transition from real money to belief-based money marks the beginning of widespread financial vulnerability. The chapter highlights how schools train people to respect authority rather than question it. Students learn to trust teachers, trust the curriculum, and trust the system, even though most educators lack real-world financial experience. This misplaced trust leads to a population that is obedient but financially weak. The author contrasts academic knowledge with practical financial intelligence, emphasizing that traditional education rarely teaches how money truly works. Another key point is the role of central banks. The author asserts that central banks function independently from democratic accountability, yet the public continues to trust them without understanding their incentives. Central banks can print unlimited amounts of money, set interest rates, and manipulate markets, actions that directly affect savings, purchasing power, and long-term financial stability. Yet the average person simply assumes these institutions act in their best interest. The author also examines trust in financial advisors. Most advisors are salespeople tied to financial products, not independent educators. Their income depends on selling approved investments, not on helping clients understand how wealth is actually built. The author argues that trusting these advisors blindly is another reason the middle class struggles financially. Chapter 2's core message is that people must be extremely selective about who they trust. Trust should be earned through results, not titles. The author urges readers to shift trust away from institutions and toward real knowledge, real experience, and real assets. Ultimately, trust is a financial decision. Misplaced trust leads to dependency, confusion, and vulnerability. Intelligent trust leads to independence and control. The chapter concludes with a direct challenge. If the financial system is built on trust, then individuals must decide for themselves who and what deserves that trust before the system shifts again and exposes the weak points. Chapter 3 shifts from defining fake money to explaining why the author personally holds gold and silver as what he calls God's money. This chapter is structured around 7 practical reasons, each designed to contrast real money with the vulnerabilities of the fiat currency system. The first reason is historical reliability. Gold and silver have served as money for thousands of years across civilizations. Unlike fiat currency, they have never failed due to political decisions or monetary policy changes. The author emphasizes that their track record provides more credibility than the promises of modern governments. Second, gold and silver are valuable because they are scarce and difficult to produce. Governments and central banks can print trillions of dollars with a keystroke, but no one can manufacture gold or silver artificially. Their value comes from natural limitation, not human manipulation. This scarcity protects them from inflationary erosion. The third reason focuses on universality. Gold and silver are recognized worldwide as stores of value. They are not bound to any one country or political system. This gives them a level of global liquidity that fiat currencies lack. The author highlights that in times of crisis, people across cultures instinctively return to precious metals as safe havens. Fourth, gold and silver provide insurance against systemic risk. The author explains that financial crises, currency collapses, and debt bubbles are not theoretical scenarios but recurring events. When trust in institutions erodes, real money becomes a stabilizing asset. The author sees gold and silver as financial protection, not speculation. Fifth, gold and silver have no counterparty risk. Unlike stocks, bonds, or bank deposits, precious metals are not dependent on another party's performance or promise. There is no bank, corporation, or government that must act for the asset to hold value. This independence is what makes gold and silver unique in a world dominated by debt-based assets. The sixth reason relates to privacy and control. Physical precious metals give individuals direct ownership. There are no digital intermediaries, no systems that can be shut down, and no bureaucratic approvals required. The author frames this as a key component of financial freedom, especially in an era where governments increasingly monitor and control financial transactions. The final reason is protection against inflation and currency debasement. As fiat money loses purchasing power, gold and silver often rise in price because they reflect the weakening of the currency. The author emphasizes that the purpose is not to profit, but to preserve real purchasing power over time. The chapter concludes by reframing gold and silver not as investments, but as a foundation of financial stability. They are tangible, historically proven forms of money that stand in contrast to the expanding world of fake, debt-based currency. For the author, owning precious metals is an essential part of navigating a financial system built on trust, manipulation, and volatility. Chapter 4 expands the idea of fake money by showing that the problems of today are not new. According to the author, the modern financial system is simply repeating a pattern that has occurred throughout history. Governments print too much money, currencies lose value, and societies pay the price. The chapter's central argument is that inflation, devaluation, and collapse are predictable outcomes when nations rely on fiat money. The author begins by explaining that every major civilization that controlled its own currency eventually abused that power, whether through debasement of metal coins or uncontrolled paper printing. Leaders have always been tempted to create money out of nothing to solve political or economic problems. The United States, he argues, is following the same path, but on a much larger scale due to global dependence on the dollar. He highlights the key turning point, 1971, when President Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. This decision allowed unlimited money creation and removed the last constraint on government spending. With no requirement to back dollars with real assets, money became debt, expandable, manipulatable, and politically driven. The author emphasizes that the shift fundamentally changed the structure of the global economy. The chapter then explains the consequences of large-scale money printing. When governments increase the supply of currency, the purchasing power of that currency declines. Inflation isn't just rising prices, it's a direct reduction in the value of money. The author argues that inflation acts as a hidden tax on the population. Savers lose purchasing power, while those who own real assets can benefit from rising valuations. This dynamic widens the wealth gap. Another major point is the role of central banks. Central banks claim to stabilize the economy, but the author asserts that their policies often accelerate instability. Low interest rates, quantitative easing, and bailout programs create artificial booms followed by painful busts. These actions distort markets and encourage excessive risk-taking. The author argues that the system is designed to protect the financial elite, not ordinary workers. Historical parallels are used to illustrate the danger. Nations that printed themselves into collapse, such as Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Argentina, are examples the author points to as warnings. While the U.S. may be far more powerful, the underlying patterns are similar: rising debt, expanding money supply, political gridlock, and declining trust. When trust breaks, currencies unravel. The chapter also addresses why most people fail to recognize the danger. Schools teach compliance, not financial awareness. Media outlets focus on short-term events rather than structural weaknesses, and the public assumes that the government knows what it's doing, even when history shows otherwise. The author argues that financial ignorance allows the cycle to continue. Chapter 4 closes by stating that printing fake money is not a solution. It is a short-term illusion. Eventually, every system built on excessive money creation reaches a breaking point. The author's message is clear. Understanding this pattern is the first step. toward protecting oneself from the next major shift in the global financial landscape. Chapter 5 shifts the focus from governments printing money to individuals printing their own money. In a metaphorical sense, the author argues that while people cannot literally issue currency like the Federal Reserve, they can create personal wealth by developing skills, knowledge, and assets that generate income independent of traditional employment. The chapter reframes wealth building as a proactive process of expanding one's personal money supply. The author begins by examining why most people fail financially. They depend on one income stream, a job, and rely on saving fiat money that continuously loses value. This dependence leaves individuals vulnerable to inflation, market volatility, and economic policy changes. The author emphasizes that employees are stuck in a system where they trade time for money, while entrepreneurs and investors use leverage, knowledge, and assets to multiply income. Understanding this difference is crucial for taking control of one's financial future. A key point in the chapter is the idea that financial education is the real printing press for individuals. Instead of relying on wages, people can print money by acquiring skills that increase earning power, such as entrepreneurship, sales, marketing, investing, and financial analysis. These skills enable individuals to create opportunities rather than wait for them. The author stresses that skills compound in value over time, similar to how inflation compounds negatively. The chapter also explains the importance of building or acquiring assets that generate cash flow. Assets such as real estate, businesses, intellectual property, or commodities function like personal money printing machines because they produce income without requiring continuous labor. The author contrasts this with liabilities disguised as assets, such as mortgages or cars, which drain cash instead of creating it. Knowing the difference between real assets and fake assets is essential for personal financial control. Another major theme is the use of good debt. In the same way governments leverage debt to expand economic activity, individuals can use debt strategically to acquire income-producing assets. The author argues that financially educated people use debt as leverage, not as a burden. When debt is paired with real assets, it becomes a tool for increasing personal productivity. By contrast, consumers use debt for consumption, which weakens their financial position. The chapter encourages readers to evaluate their current financial habits using a simple question: am I printing money, or is the system printing money off of me? Employees who rely solely on salaries allow inflation and taxes to erode their income. Investors and entrepreneurs, however, position themselves to benefit from economic expansion rather than suffer from it. The author concludes the chapter with a practical challenge. Individuals must redesign their financial lives to mimic the mechanisms used by governments and institutions, not by manipulating currency, but by building skills, creating assets, and leveraging opportunities. Real control begins when people stop depending on external systems and start generating value themselves. The message is clear: to survive in a world of fake money, individuals must build their own money printing capabilities through education, creativity, and asset ownership. Chapter 6 expands the discussion of precious metals by shifting from practical arguments to philosophical principles. The author explains that owning gold and silver is not merely a financial strategy, but a mindset rooted in independence, skepticism toward institutional control, and long-term thinking. These 8 philosophical reasons build on the idea that real wealth is grounded in values, not just numbers. The first philosophical reason is freedom from government manipulation. Gold and silver exist outside political systems. The author argues that fiat money is a tool governments use to control behavior through inflation, taxation, and monetary policy. Holding precious metals is a personal stance against this system. Second is trust in natural law over man-made promises. Precious metals drive value from physical properties and scarcity, not from legislation or economic theories. The author emphasizes that natural laws are stable, political systems are not. This makes gold and silver reliable across generations. The third reason involves personal responsibility. Owning physical metals requires individuals to manage their own storage, risk, and security. This responsibility enforces discipline and reduces dependence on financial institutions. The author positions this mindset as essential for building real financial intelligence. Fourth, precious metals represent long-term thinking. The author argues that fiat money encourages short-term behavior because its value declines predictably. In contrast, real money encourages preservation and planning. This philosophical shift influences how individuals approach work, investing, and life decisions. Fifth is resilience during systemic failure. Throughout history, societies that suffered currency collapses found stability in gold and silver. The author includes this as a philosophical stance. Preparing for uncertainty is not pessimism, but realism. Precious metals offer psychological and financial insulation against crisis. The sixth philosophical reason is independence from financial institutions. Banks, brokers, and fund managers operate within the fiat system and rely heavily on leverage and derivatives. By owning metals directly, individuals reduce their exposure to systemic risk and counterparty failure. This independence is a core value emphasized repeatedly in the book. The seventh reason revolves around transparency and simplicity. Gold and silver are straightforward assets. They do not rely on complex financial structures, management teams, or regulatory environments. The author argues that simplicity is a philosophical advantage because it removes speculation and focuses on intrinsic value. The final philosophical reason is alignment with historical continuity. By holding the same form of money used by past civilizations, individuals connect to a legacy of stability. The author believes that understanding history and aligning with long-standing patterns is a fundamental principle of financial wisdom. Chapter 6 concludes by challenging readers to identify their own philosophical anchors. The author states that financial strategies without belief systems are weak, especially during economic upheaval. Precious metals, in his view, are not just assets, but reflections of deeper values, independence, skepticism, preparation, and respect for historical and natural laws. These principles form the foundation for navigating a world dominated by fake money and artificial financial structures. Chapter 7 shifts the discussion from money to education, specifically highlighting why the author believes genuine wisdom, not academic credentials, is the foundation of financial success. The chapter uses the analogy of the three wise men to demonstrate that wisdom comes from seeking truth, questioning assumptions, and being open to continuous learning rather than relying on institutional teachings. The author argues that most people confuse schooling with education. Schools reward memorization, obedience, and conformity. True education, however, requires curiosity, critical thinking, and exposure to real-world experiences. The chapter asserts that the greatest financial mistake people make is assuming that formal schooling prepares them for the economic realities of adulthood. According to the author, traditional education produces employees, not thinkers, investors, or entrepreneurs. A central concept in this chapter is lifelong learning as an asset. The author explains that people who continuously learn through books, mentors, experiences, and mistakes develop financial intelligence that no degree can replicate. Financial intelligence includes understanding debt, taxes, investing, risk, and the behavior of markets. These topics are rarely addressed in school curricula, leaving most people financially unprepared. The author emphasizes that wisdom requires humility. The wise are not those who believe they already know enough, but those who constantly seek improvement. This mindset allows individuals to adapt to economic changes, technological disruptions, and evolving financial systems. In contrast, those who depend solely on what they learned in school often become rigid, outdated, and vulnerable. Another key theme is the importance of choosing teachers carefully. Not all teachers provide real-world value. The author argues that many academic instructors lack practical financial experience and therefore cannot teach what they themselves do not understand. As a result, students inherit theories, not skills. The chapter encourages readers to learn from people who have actually accomplished what they teach: entrepreneurs, investors, industry experts, and practitioners who operate outside classroom boundaries. The chapter also addresses the role of mistakes as learning tools in school. Mistakes are punished with bad grades. In real life, mistakes are information. They help individuals adjust strategies, improve judgment, and build resilience. The author notes that wealthy and financially intelligent people treat mistakes as data points, rather than failures. This philosophical shift allows them to grow faster than those who avoid risk out of fear. The three wise men analogy serves to communicate that wisdom is not about formal status, but about mindset. The wise question everything, challenge assumptions, and seek knowledge beyond conventional sources. The author argues that this approach is essential in an era of fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. Chapter 7 concludes by reiterating that lifelong learning is the ultimate competitive advantage. The financial world changes constantly, and only those who continue to educate themselves can recognize opportunities, adapt to disruptions, and protect themselves from systemic risks. For the author, wisdom is not a gift, it is a disciplined practice. Chapter 8 focuses on the author's critique of the modern education system and explains why he believes many people must go back to school, not to traditional institutions, but to a different form of learning that actually builds financial intelligence. The central idea is that schools have become part of the fake system because they prepare students for an economic world that no longer exists. The chapter begins by stating that most people assume education ends with a diploma. The author argues the opposite. Formal schooling often gives individuals a false sense of competence. Graduates leave school thinking they are educated, when in reality they have only learned to follow instructions, pass tests, and operate within a structured environment. According to the author, this mindset is damaging in a financial system driven by rapid change, competition, and uncertainty. A key point in this chapter is the distinction between school learning and real-world learning. School learning is theoretical, based on memorization and standardized testing. Real-world learning requires experimentation, decision-making, risk management, and problem-solving, all skills essential for financial success. The author argues that school conditions people to avoid mistakes, but in the real world, mistakes are the primary driver of growth. The chapter also criticizes how schools promote the belief that job security comes from degrees. The author states that in a world of fake money and unstable economies, relying on a paycheck is one of the riskiest financial positions a person can take. Traditional education teaches people to become employees, not entrepreneurs or investors. This leaves them dependent on a system that does not reward financial intelligence. Another major theme is critical thinking. The author argues that the current education model discourages questioning. Students are taught what to think, not how to think. This lack of critical analysis makes people vulnerable to manipulation by governments, media, and financial institutions. In the author's view, financially intelligent individuals must challenge assumptions, especially about money, work, and retirement. The chapter emphasizes that going back to school means seeking education outside traditional institutions. This includes mentorship, self-study, hands-on experience, business failures, investment experimentation, seminars, and reading financial literature. The author's own financial education came from non-traditional sources, real estate deals, business ventures, and learning from successful entrepreneurs, not from formal academic paths. Chapter 8 also addresses the emotional barriers that keep people stuck. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, and fear of uncertainty prevent individuals from pursuing the type of education that builds financial capability. The author argues that courage is a form of intelligence because it enables learning through action. The chapter concludes with a direct message to fight what's fake: fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. Individuals must reject passive learning and adopt a mindset of continuous, self-directed education. Real financial strength comes from understanding how the world works, not how textbooks say it works. The invitation to go back to school is a call to rebuild one's financial foundation through real experience, real knowledge, and real-world results. Chapter 9 explores a core concept in financial intelligence: the ability to see what others do not see. The author uses the metaphor of fishing to emphasize that wealth creation is not about luck. It's about identifying opportunities that are invisible to the majority. because they rely on conventional thinking. The chapter argues that financial success requires shifting from surface-level observation to deeper analysis of how money, markets, and human behavior actually function. The author begins by explaining that most people focus only on visible outcomes, job titles, salaries, stock prices, market headlines, without understanding the underlying systems that drive them. This lack of deeper visibility keeps people trapped in the same financial patterns throughout their lives. They see the fish jumping, but do not understand the ecosystem below the surface. For the author, the ability to see the invisible is what separates financially intelligent individuals from passive participants in the economy. One of the chapter's main ideas is that opportunities are rarely found in obvious places. By the time the general public recognizes an opportunity, it is usually too late. Real opportunities exist before the crowd notices them, often in areas where people feel uncertainty or discomfort. The author emphasizes that entrepreneurs and investors learn to identify patterns, inefficiencies, and emerging shifts before they become mainstream. The chapter also explains that seeing the invisible requires questioning assumptions. For example, many people believe job security comes from working for a strong company. The author argues that job security is actually an illusion because employees rely on decisions they cannot control. By contrast, entrepreneurs and investors operate in environments they intentionally create. This shift in perspective allows them to identify financial openings hidden from those who follow traditional paths. A critical point the author raises is that financial statements, market trends, and economic indicators hide more than they reveal. Individuals must learn to interpret what these numbers mean, not just what they show. The visible data is only the surface. The invisible dynamics, management decisions, market psychology, monetary policy, and debt structures determine long-term outcomes. Financial literacy unlocks this deeper level of visibility. The chapter highlights how fear prevents people from exploring what they can't immediately see. Fear drives individuals to seek safety in predictable routines. However, in a world of fake money and uncertain economic conditions, predictability is often riskier than exploration. The author states that overcoming fear is essential for accessing opportunities that the majority overlook. Another key message is the importance of mentors. People who have achieved financial success can point out invisible opportunities because they have already navigated similar terrain. Learning from experienced investors or entrepreneurs shortens the learning curve and helps individuals recognize signals that most people ignore. Chapter 9 concludes by reinforcing the metaphor. Catching more fish requires understanding the lake, not just casting the line. Financial opportunities follow patterns, and those patterns become clear only when individuals develop the ability to analyze what is beneath the surface. To thrive in a system filled with fake money and institutional noise, individuals must cultivate perception, curiosity, and strategic awareness. Chapter 10 emphasizes one of the author's core beliefs: mistakes are essential for building real financial intelligence. The chapter argues that schools punish mistakes, while real life rewards those who learn from them. This difference creates a structural disadvantage for people who rely solely on academic training, because they never develop the resilience, creativity, and adaptability required in the real financial world. The author begins by contrasting the academic environment with the entrepreneurial environment. In school, mistakes reduce grades, lower confidence, and create fear of taking risks. Students learn to avoid failure at all costs. In the real world, however, avoiding mistakes prevents growth. Entrepreneurs and investors understand that mistakes provide feedback, reveal weaknesses, and guide better decisions. The author asserts that financial success depends on embracing mistakes, not avoiding them. A key point in the chapter is the concept of real teachers. The author differentiates between fake teachers, who teach theory without experience, and real teachers, who teach through practice, failure, and results. Mistakes fall into the second category. They provide lessons no textbook can offer because they come directly from reality. According to the author, every financial mistake, a bad investment, a miscalculation, a failed business, contains information that strengthens decision-making ability. The chapter also highlights the emotional component of mistakes. Fear, embarrassment, and self-doubt often stop people from acting. The author argues that emotional management is a critical part of financial intelligence. People who allow fear to dictate choices stay trapped in safe but limited environments, such as stable jobs or predictable routines. Those who are willing to face emotional discomfort gain the capacity to handle uncertainty, which is essential in an economy shaped by fake money, shifting markets, and unstable institutions. Another major theme is risk literacy. Schools do not teach students how to evaluate risk. As a result, most adults default to avoiding risk entirely. The author states that understanding risk, not eliminating it, is what separates financially successful individuals from the average person. Mistakes accelerate the development of risk literacy because they expose the consequences of decisions in a way theory cannot. The chapter also touches on the importance of building feedback loops. In the business and investing world, feedback comes from markets, customers, cash flow, and performance metrics. Mistakes highlight what needs to change in those systems. The author argues that people who avoid mistakes never build feedback loops, leaving them blind to their weaknesses and unprepared for financial challenges. The author stresses that mistakes must be analyzed, not repeated. Learning requires reflection. What went wrong? Why? What assumptions were false? What skills were lacking? This analysis transforms mistakes into assets, intellectual capital that improves future decisions. Chapter 10 concludes with a direct message. In a world filled with fake information, fake teachers, and fake financial security, mistakes offer the most honest form of education. They provide clarity, accountability, and real-world insight. For the author, mistakes are not setbacks. They are the foundation of financial wisdom and long-term success. Chapter 11 presents one of the author's strongest arguments. The traditional school system is structurally designed to keep people financially dependent. According to the author, schooling creates a mindset that is incompatible with wealth building in a modern economy, dominated by fake money, rising inflation, and volatile markets. The chapter dissects how academic pathways shape financial behavior, and why that behavior frequently leads to long-term financial struggle. The author begins by explaining that schools were originally created during the industrial age to produce workers, not thinkers, investors, or entrepreneurs. The curriculum rewards compliance, punctuality, memorization, and task execution. These traits benefit employers, but they do not develop the skills required for financial independence, such as risk assessment, creativity, critical thinking, and asset building. As a result, the traditional school system prepares students for jobs, not wealth. A central claim in the chapter is that schools teach people to depend on external authority. From childhood, students learn to wait for instructions, follow a standardized path, and rely on grades to measure their worth. This conditioning carries into adulthood when individuals rely on employers for income, governments for pensions, and financial institutions for advice. The author argues that this dependency mindset is why many people remain trapped in the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. The chapter also highlights the economic consequences of relying on a job in a fake money system. Wages rarely grow at the same pace as inflation. Taxes consume a significant portion of earned income. Job security is increasingly unstable. Despite this, schools encourage students to pursue careers as employees rather than entrepreneurs or investors. The author states that this mismatch between education and economic reality is a major factor in financial stagnation. The author critiques the way schools treat failure. Academic systems punish mistakes, training students to avoid risk in the financial world. Avoiding risk eliminates opportunities for growth. Investors and entrepreneurs learn through experimentation and course correction. Employees trained by the school system often become risk-averse, choosing security over potential wealth-building actions. This mindset is particularly damaging in an economy where fake money erodes savings and passive strategies fall behind inflation. Another important theme is the lack of financial education in schools. Students graduate without understanding taxes, debt, investing, assets, liabilities, or the mechanics of money creation. This leaves them vulnerable to consumer debt, poor investment decisions and financial dependence. Meanwhile, the wealthy rely on knowledge, not credentials, to build and protect their wealth. The author frames this gap as a structural flaw intentionally left unaddressed by academic institutions. The chapter also emphasizes that people must buck the system, break away from outdated educational models to gain financial control. This does not mean rejecting learning. It means rejecting the narrow educational path that school offers. Real-world experience, mentorship, entrepreneurship, and continuous self-education are presented as essential strategies to avoid the financial pitfalls built into the school-to-job pipeline. Chapter 11 closes with a firm message. In a world of fake money and systemic instability, traditional schooling is insufficient and, in many cases, counterproductive. To avoid remaining financially poor, individuals must replace the school mindset with financial intelligence, adaptability, and independent thinking. Chapter 12 examines how the future of education is shifting away from traditional institutions and toward entrepreneurial models that better prepare individuals for a rapidly changing financial world. The author argues that the conventional school system has become outdated, while entrepreneurs in education, innovators who redesign how people learn, are emerging as the true drivers of modern knowledge and financial empowerment. The chapter begins by stating that the current education system is structurally incapable of adapting to technological disruption, economic shifts, and the realities of fake money. Schools move slowly, resist change, and protect bureaucratic interests. Meanwhile, the economy is evolving faster than traditional education can respond. This creates a widening gap between what people learn in school and what they need to succeed in real life. The author highlights that educational entrepreneurship is rising because the market demands practical, real-world learning. These entrepreneurs create new platforms, online courses, mentorship programs, specialized academies, skill-based training, investment bootcamps, and digital learning ecosystems that teach the competencies traditional education ignores. These competencies include financial literacy, entrepreneurship, investing, emotional intelligence, and technological proficiency. A core theme is that entrepreneurs in education are solving problems that schools refuse to address. Schools teach students to memorize information and follow standardized paths. Educational entrepreneurs teach students how to create value, solve problems, and think independently. They design systems that reward creativity, experimentation, and adaptability, skills necessary in a world where fake money continually reshapes economic conditions. The author also argues that entrepreneurial educators look forward, not backward. Traditional schools teach outdated models of career success, such as climbing corporate ladders or relying on retirement plans. By contrast, educational entrepreneurs anticipate future needs, digital entrepreneurship, global markets, decentralized finance, and the increasing importance of self-reliance. These innovators prepare learners for tomorrow's economy rather than yesterday's. A significant point in the chapter is the concept of learning as a business, not an institution. Entrepreneurs recognize that education is a market-driven industry, where consumers choose learning that produces results. This dynamic forces educational providers to deliver value. If learners do not gain skills, they walk away. Schools, however, are insulated from market forces, allowing them to offer irrelevant content with minimal accountability. The chapter also emphasizes that entrepreneurs in education thrive because they embrace technology. They use digital platforms to reach global audiences, democratize knowledge, and bypass traditional gatekeepers. This technological shift is creating new opportunities for people who want financial education that is practical, affordable, and directly applicable to wealth building. The author warns that many people fail to see the future because they rely on the old model of schooling as their primary source of learning. He argues that individuals who embrace entrepreneurial education will gain a decisive advantage in a world driven by innovation, decentralization, and rapid economic change. Chapter 12 concludes with a clear message: the future belongs to those who take control of their own learning. Entrepreneurial education is not optional. It is the roadmap for financial intelligence in a world where traditional institutions cannot. Keep up with reality. Chapter 13 explores the importance of choosing the right teachers, emphasizing that real financial education depends heavily on the source of the knowledge, not just the information itself. The author argues that in a world filled with fake money, fake assets, and fake institutions, learning from the wrong teachers can be financially dangerous. This chapter lays out the criteria for identifying genuine teachers versus fake teachers, and why the distinction matters for long-term financial intelligence. The author opens by discussing the concept of being a student of God. In this context, God symbolizes truth, principles, and natural laws, not religious doctrine. The point is that real wisdom comes from understanding universal truths, rather than temporary opinions. The author states that the best teachers help students connect with these deeper principles, whereas fake teachers simply pass along standardized information without real-world relevance. A major theme in this chapter is the difference between teachers who teach from experience and those who teach from theory. Fake teachers rely on academic credentials, but often lack any practical financial success. They teach concepts they have never applied. Real teachers, by contrast, speak from experience. Their lessons come from successes, failures, risks, and actual financial decision-making. The author argues that people should be extremely selective about who they learn from, especially in topics involving wealth. The chapter also critiques the educational system's obsession with credentials. Degrees, titles, and certifications often impress students, but they rarely indicate real-life competence. In the author's view, many people blindly trust teachers because of institutional authority rather than examining whether the teacher has done what they are teaching. This leads to a cycle where poor financial habits are passed down through formal education. Another key point is the role of mentorship. The author emphasizes that mentors who have real financial success provide insights that cannot be found in textbooks or classrooms. They point out risks, opportunities, and patterns that only come from experience. This kind of learning accelerates financial growth and helps individuals avoid costly mistakes. The ability to choose mentors wisely becomes a critical skill. Chapter 13 also highlights the importance of learning from diverse sources, not just traditional institutions. Real-world teachers include entrepreneurs, investors, business owners, and individuals who have achieved financial independence. These people provide practical strategies, not theoretical frameworks. The author stresses that the most valuable lessons often come from observing behavior, rather than listening to lectures. The chapter emphasizes personal accountability in education. People must take responsibility for who they listen to. Blaming schools or institutions for financial failure is not enough. Individuals must actively seek out better teachers. The author argues that one's financial destiny is shaped by one's educational choices. Chapter 13 concludes with a reminder that in a world of fake systems, the quality of one's teachers determines the quality of one's financial future. Real teachers illuminate truth, challenge assumptions, and guide students toward independence. Fake teachers reinforce outdated beliefs that keep people financially vulnerable. The author's message is simple: choose your teachers wisely, because they shape your ability to navigate a world built on illusion. Chapter 14 introduces the central theme of the fake assets section. The traditional retirement model is breaking down, and relying on it is becoming increasingly dangerous. The author argues that the modern retirement system was built for a different era, one defined by stable money, lower life expectancy, and predictable economic conditions. In today's environment of fiat currency, rising debt, and aging populations, the system is no longer sustainable. The chapter begins by explaining why the author chose to retire young. This decision is not about quitting work. It is about escaping dependence on a failing financial structure. Traditional retirement assumes that a person will work for decades, save consistently, and then live off that savings and pension benefits. According to the author, this assumption no longer matches financial reality. Inflation, market volatility, and underfunded pension programs have made the old formula unreliable. A key point in the chapter is the systemic weakness of retirement funds. Pension plans, both public and private, are facing massive shortfalls. Many were designed in an era when people lived shorter lives and investment returns were more stable. Today, retirees live decades longer, but the money supporting those decades has not been adequately funded. The author warns that many retirement programs are already insolvent or close to it, though few people recognize the danger. The chapter also highlights the impact of fake money on retirement planning. Since the dollar is no longer backed by real assets and is constantly being expanded through debt and printing, the value of savings erodes over time. Even a well-funded retirement account can lose real purchasing power if inflation accelerates. This means that people who rely on saving cash or investing in traditional financial instruments face long-term risk, even if they believe they are being responsible. Another major issue discussed is the reliance on fake assets within retirement portfolios. Pension funds and retirement accounts typically invest heavily in stocks, bonds, and derivatives, assets whose value depends on monetary policy, government intervention, and market psychology. The author argues that many of these assets are inflated rather than genuinely productive, making them fragile during economic stress. This exposes retirees to hidden risks they do not understand. The author frames retiring young as a strategic move to build financial independence early. By focusing on cash-flowing assets such as real estate, businesses, and other entrepreneurial ventures, this approach avoids dependence on employers, governments, and financial institutions. Instead of waiting until 65 to rely on a potentially unstable pension, the author prefers to build income streams that function independently of market cycles. A final theme of the chapter is the expectation of a coming retirement crisis. As government debt climbs, populations age, and pension obligations increase, many countries will be forced to print money to meet their commitments. This will likely accelerate inflation and reduce the real value of retirement benefits. The author concludes that individuals should not trust their financial future to systems that are mathematically unsustainable. Chapter 15 examines how modern financial systems systematically extract wealth from the poor and middle class through retirement plans, pension programs, and widespread reliance on fake assets. The author argues that most people do not realize how their money is being taken from them because the processes are hidden behind financial jargon, institutional structures, and societal norms that discourage questioning. The chapter begins by identifying the core problem. Most individuals do not control their own money. Instead, they hand it over to financial institutions, pension managers, mutual fund companies, and government-backed programs. These entities use workers' contributions to fund operations, generate fees, and take on investment risks that the contributors themselves do not understand. The author states that this loss of control is the first way the system takes people's money. A key focus of the chapter is fees and expenses within retirement accounts. Even small management fees compound into significant losses over decades. The author argues that many funds underperform the market while still charging high fees, meaning investors carry the downside while institutions capture guaranteed profit. Most workers never notice this because they are trained to trust professionals, without understanding how those professionals get paid. The chapter then explains how pension programs are structurally flawed. Many pensions are underfunded, relying on unrealistic projections of investment returns. When returns fail to meet expectations, taxpayers and workers absorb the losses, while pension managers and political leaders avoid accountability. The author warns that this system is unsustainable and will result in reduced benefits or complete failure in many regions. Another major theme involves fake assets investments that appear valuable, but are tied to speculative pricing, excessive leverage, or artificial demand created by monetary policy. Stocks inflated by buybacks, bonds with historically low yields, and derivatives dependent on central bank intervention are cited as examples. The author argues that retirement accounts heavily rely on these assets, exposing ordinary people to invisible risks. When markets correct, the losses fall on workers, not on the institutions that manage their money. The chapter also highlights how inflation silently erodes retirement savings. Even when accounts grow nominally, the real purchasing power declines due to currency debasement. This means many people who believe they are preparing for retirement are merely treading water. Inflation effectively transfers wealth from savers to borrowers, and asset owners a dynamic that favors the financial elite. The author criticizes the traditional advice given to the middle class: save money, invest in a diversified portfolio, and trust the system. He argues that this advice benefits financial institutions far more than the individuals who follow it. By locking money into long-term retirement accounts, individuals lose flexibility and become dependent on a system designed to extract value from them. Chapter 15 concludes by asserting that real financial security requires taking control, learning how money works, choosing assets deliberately, and building cash-flowing investments instead of relying on institutional promises. The author emphasizes that unless individuals break away from fake assets and passive financial strategies, they will continue to grow poorer in a system engineered to work against them. Chapter 16 examines how fake news, biased information, and lack of transparency distort financial decision-making. The author argues that in a world of fake money and fake assets, the information people consume has become just as fake, and this misinformation plays a major role in keeping the poor and middle class financially confused. The metaphor fishing in clean water refers to learning in an environment where information is clear, honest, and free from manipulation. The chapter begins by outlining how media organizations shape financial perceptions. The author states that most mainstream news outlets are not designed to educate people, but to capture attention and generate profit. Sensational headlines, short-term market commentary, and fear-based reporting keep audiences emotionally reactive rather than informed. As a result, people make financial decisions based on noise instead of long-term fundamentals. A key point is that financial media often serves institutional interests. Large corporations, banks, and investment firms influence what is reported and how it is presented. The author argues that much of the expert advice on television is marketing disguised as education. Recommendations often promote financial products that benefit institutions, not individual viewers. This creates a contaminated information environment, the opposite of clean water. The chapter also discusses how fake news fuels market manipulation. Rumors, selective reporting, and biased analysis can drive panic or excitement, influencing asset prices artificially. Ordinary investors react emotionally, buying high and selling low, while institutional players take advantage of the volatility. The author stresses that without understanding how information is used strategically, individuals become targets in financial markets. Another major theme is transparency. The author asserts that transparency is increasingly rare in both government policy and corporate behavior. For example, quantitative easing, pension liabilities, and derivative exposure are rarely discussed clearly in mainstream channels. Without transparency, individuals cannot accurately assess risk. This lack of clarity forces the public to operate in dirty water, where visibility is low and mistakes are easy to make. The author emphasizes the importance of building the ability to clean the water personally. This requires developing critical thinking skills, cross-checking information, studying primary sources, and learning from people with real experience rather than relying on media personalities. Individuals must learn to distinguish facts from opinions, fundamentals from narratives, and long-term trends from short-term noise. The chapter also highlights the role of financial education communities, mentorship networks, and entrepreneurial learning environments. These communities provide clean water by offering practical insights based on experience, rather than institutional agendas. The author argues that surrounding oneself with the right people and information sources is one of the most powerful forms of financial protection. Chapter 16 concludes with a clear warning. In a world dominated by fake systems, the quality of information determines the quality of financial decisions. People who consume contaminated information remain confused, reactive, and vulnerable. Those who learn to fish in clean water by seeking transparency, questioning narratives, and relying on real-world sources gain a significant advantage in navigating a financial landscape shaped by manipulation and uncertainty. Chapter 17 examines the structural vulnerabilities of the US dollar and argues that the global monetary system is moving toward a major reset. The author does not predict exact timing, but emphasizes that the patterns leading to currency failure are already visible. The chapter connects fake money, excessive debt, and central bank intervention to a cycle of booms and busts that becomes increasingly unstable over time. The chapter begins by explaining why the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. Its dominance was built on trust, economic strength, and the gold standard. However, once the U.S. abandoned gold in 1971, the dollar transitioned from real money to fiat money backed only by government promises and military power. According to the author, this shift created conditions for eventual decline because fiat currencies historically fail once debt grows faster than productivity. A key point in the chapter is the mechanics of booms and busts. The author argues that central banks artificially stimulate the economy through low interest rates and money printing. This creates temporary booms in stock prices, real estate, and corporate profits. But when debt loads become unmanageable or when inflation rises, the system contracts, causing recessions and crashes. These cycles are not accidental. They are built into a system dependent on fake money. The author explains that the U.S. government and Federal Reserve use monetary expansion to delay economic pain. However, each intervention requires more money than the one before, making the system increasingly fragile. The underlying message is that no economy can print its way into long-term stability. Eventually, confidence erodes, and once confidence fails, fiat currency collapses regardless of military or political power. Another major theme is the global implications of U.S. monetary policy. Many countries depend on the dollar for trade, savings, and reserves. When the Federal Reserve prints money, inflation is exported worldwide. This creates distortions in foreign markets and pushes nations to seek alternatives to the dollar. The author suggests that rising geopolitical tensions and competing economic blocs are early signals of a shift away from U.S.-centric finance. Chapter 17 also discusses how ordinary people misunderstand inflation. Most see rising prices as an economic problem, but the author stresses that inflation is a monetary problem. It reflects the declining purchasing power of the dollar. Savers, retirees, and workers lose the most because their income does not keep up with rising costs. Asset owners and borrowers benefit because inflation reduces the real value of their debt. The author warns that if the dollar continues losing purchasing power and global confidence, a currency reset becomes inevitable. This could involve new monetary systems, digital currencies, or international agreements that reduce the dollar's dominance. For individuals, the author argues that relying on dollar-based savings or retirement plans is risky in such an environment. Chapter 17 concludes by stating that while the U.S. dollar may not collapse immediately, the long-term trajectory is clear. Fake money systems eventually fail. Those who prepare by understanding assets, debt, and monetary history will be better positioned to navigate whatever crisis or reset comes next. Chapter 18 shifts the conversation from diagnosing problems in the financial system to outlining how individuals can prepare themselves for a stronger and more stable future. The author emphasizes that true financial preparedness is not just about accumulating assets. It requires spiritual stability, mental clarity, and personal purpose. In a world of fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets, internal strength becomes a strategic advantage. The chapter opens by arguing that financial success is impossible without a strong internal foundation. People who operate from fear, confusion, or dependency are more easily manipulated by financial institutions, employers, and government systems. The author explains that internal health, emotional, mental, and spiritual, is what allows individuals to make rational decisions, recognize opportunities, and withstand economic volatility. A central theme in the chapter is the need for long-term thinking. Many people react emotionally to short-term market movements, news cycles, and political narratives. This reactive mindset makes individuals vulnerable to panic, poor decision-making, and reliance on institutional guidance. The author argues that those who think long-term can position themselves ahead of economic trends instead of being controlled by them. Long-term thinking provides stability in a system driven by short-term incentives. Another major point is the importance of personal mission and purpose. The author states that without a clear mission, people tend to drift financially, following conventional paths that lead to dependency. A mission creates direction and resilience. It helps individuals choose better teachers, pursue meaningful work, and build assets aligned with their strengths. Purpose-driven people, according to the author, are harder for the system to exploit. Chapter 18 also emphasizes spiritual health as a financial asset. In the author's framework, spiritual does not refer to religion, but to inner alignment having values, integrity, and a stable internal compass. Financial storms are inevitable in an economy built on debt and political decisions. Spiritual clarity helps individuals remain calm and focused during these storms, making them less likely to react impulsively or fall victim to fear-based messaging. A core practical message in this chapter is that individuals must build real assets businesses, skills, relationships, and investments that produce value regardless of market cycles. The author argues that fake assets are dependent on the performance of systems outside one's control. Real assets, especially cash-flowing ones, provide independence and resilience. Developing these assets requires education, discipline, and a willingness to operate outside traditional institutional pathways. The chapter also discusses personal responsibility. Many people blame governments, employers, or markets for their financial difficulties. The author asserts that taking responsibility is the only effective strategy. In a fake financial world, responsibility shifts focus from external factors to internal capabilities, which can be developed and strengthened over time. Chapter 18 concludes with a forward-looking message. Despite the instability of the modern financial system, individuals who prioritize spiritual strength, long-term thinking, and the building of real assets can create a brighter future. The author argues that the goal is not to escape the system entirely, but to rise above it, becoming independent, informed, and capable of thriving regardless of economic conditions. Chapter 19 delivers the final message of the book. In a world dominated by fear, conformity, and financial dependence, individuals must take complete control of their financial lives if they want to rise above the limitations imposed by the system. The author uses the metaphor of eagles and chickens to highlight the difference between people who think independently and those who follow the crowd without questioning. The chapter begins by explaining that most people behave like chickens because they are conditioned from childhood to seek safety, avoid risk, and follow authority. This behavior is reinforced by schools, employers, media, and financial institutions. The result is a population that prioritizes comfort over growth and predictability over opportunity. The author argues that this mindset traps people in financial systems built on fake money and fake assets. In contrast, eagles represent independent thinkers, individuals who question assumptions, take calculated risks, and accept responsibility for their outcomes. Eagles do not depend on institutions for guidance. They study money, build skills, acquire assets, and learn from environments beyond traditional education. The author positions this mindset as essential for navigating a financial world increasingly shaped by political decisions, debt expansion, and systemic manipulation. A major theme in the chapter is the importance of self-responsibility. Many people look to governments, employers, or financial advisors to secure their future. The author argues that this dependency is dangerous because institutions often act in their own interest, not the individual's. Taking responsibility means taking control of learning, financial planning, and asset selection instead of outsourcing these decisions. The chapter highlights the role of environment and association. People become like the individuals they spend the most time with. If someone surrounds themselves with chickens, people who avoid risk, complain, or accept mediocrity, they will adopt the same limitations. To soar, individuals must place themselves in environments where ambition, financial intelligence, and high standards are the norm. Mentors, communities, and networks play a crucial role in shaping mindset and opportunity. Another key point is the emphasis on courage and emotional intelligence. Financial progress often requires confronting fear of failure, criticism, uncertainty, or stepping outside societal norms. The author states that many people stay poor not because they lack capability, but because they allow emotional barriers to dictate their decisions. Eagles manage emotions intelligently. They do not let fear control their financial strategy. The chapter also reinforces the importance of owning real assets. In a world of fake money and inflated markets, individuals must prioritize assets that generate cash flow, hold intrinsic value, or produce long-term growth. Building and controlling assets is a practical expression of personal power and independence. Chapter 19 concludes by stating that rising above the financial system is not about rebelling or escaping. It is about transforming one's mindset. By thinking like an eagle, embracing responsibility, cultivating the right environment, and building real assets, individuals can thrive regardless of how unstable the global financial system becomes. The final message is clear: you cannot change the world, but you can change how you operate within it. FAKE presents a comprehensive breakdown of how modern society is built on three pillars of deception: fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. Across 19 chapters, the author argues that the financial struggles of the poor and middle class are not the result of laziness or lack of effort. They are the result of operating inside a system designed to benefit those who understand how money really works. The first section, Fake Money, exposes the structure of the fiat monetary system. The book explains how money stopped being real after the gold standard ended in 1971, turning the U.S. dollar into a debt-based currency that loses value over time. Inflation, central bank policy, and political interventions distort economic signals while quietly eroding purchasing power. Those who rely on saving money in cash or traditional retirement plans fall behind, while those who acquire real assets, gold, silver, real estate, businesses position themselves to stay ahead of inflation and monetary manipulation. The second section, Fake Teachers, critiques the traditional education system. Schools teach compliance, memorization, and risk avoidance instead of financial intelligence. Students graduate without understanding taxes, debt, investing, or how money is created. The author argues that real financial education comes from mentors, experience, trial and error, and lifelong learning. To succeed financially, individuals must break free from institutional programming and develop critical thinking skills, entrepreneurial abilities, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. The final section, Fake Assets, examines how retirement plans and institutional investments steer individuals into inflated, leveraged, or fragile financial products. Many pension systems are underfunded, and retirement accounts rely heavily on assets vulnerable to market manipulation. The author states that depending on these structures is dangerous, especially in an era defined by rising debt and currency weakening. Instead, individuals must build financial independence through cash-flowing assets, personal responsibility, and strategic long-term planning. At its core, FAK is not a book about fear. It's a blueprint for financial independence in a system that rewards the informed and punishes the unaware. The message is consistent throughout. Understand how the world actually works, not how institutions want you to think it works. Build real assets. Learn continuously. Take responsibility. Develop the mindset of an eagle rather than a chicken. The conclusion reinforces that you cannot change the global financial system, but you can change how you operate within it. Those who understand fake money, question fake teachers, and avoid fake assets will be positioned to thrive regardless of future economic disruptions. If this breakdown opened your eyes, don't leave empty-handed. Hit like to help more people escape financial misinformation. Drop a comment telling me which part of fake hit you the hardest. And if you want more deep, no fluff summaries of the best financial books out there, subscribe and turn on notifications, because your financial education doesn't end here. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.